Okay guys, so in this video we're gonna walk through the creation of our header. So let's have a look. So here is our little header section here where I basically just created a subset of the components that I think are somewhat relevant to this project. I mean, we don't have to go completely crazy and add all of the features that are here, because if we were to do that, it would take years to get through this series. Uh, and we simply don't have that kind of time. So let's focus on the things that are the most value building, and we might add some stuff on top of that. So we've added some type of illustration for what languages we have, and we've added this little filter button and adding some keys like that button. These things don't do anything right now. And then of course we have added in something that illustrates what user account you're logged in as. We don't have to have an image and all that stuff. I mean, if you were to build this yourself as an administrative tool, all I can say is that usually the way it goes, it doesn't have to be this way. But for smaller to mid-sized companies when you make an administrative tool, they kind of just want things to be shipped as quickly as possible because they consider it to not be user-facing, and then functionality is more important than UI. I don't always agree with that, but that's the way it works, so we're gonna stick with that. So we have our little project. We're probably going to make this like some type of configuration thing later on, but for now it's fine to just have the component in of itself. And then we like added the filter button, and then you see this little pop-up that comes where like we can click and we can like select something, and then it turns into this little filtering thing here. And basically what that is that like this menu has more items, but since we don't want to support all of these features, we're simply going to select the tags thing, because I think that is something that is truly useful, where you can click a tag and then you can see a filtered list for the tags, like, or for the tag that you want to see, because the tag system is it's a very useful feature in order to segment like translations for different pages or different concepts. And then of course we can click this little button here and then we reset it, right? And that's pretty much all the functionality we have. So let's look at the code. So I just renamed my boot jar a little bit here. As you can see, nothing super important there, but let's touch on this, which is fairly interesting, which I think is a good point to make. So TSLint is something I highly recommend that you use. I know that the TypeScript team is at the moment of making this video trying to get in some linting into ESLint instead, but for now TSLint is probably the way to go for TypeScript purposes, and it's a very useful linting tool which helps a lot. I've cleaned up a lot of stuff that I'd missed when you work and you work and you work, but you always miss these little details. So having a linter helps a lot. And I am an advocate of using no default exports, which basically forces you to never use a default export from a file. The reason for that is that it becomes very like, then when you export something, you will actually see whether or not you use the correct names, and you will have a symbol that you can like kind of hatch into. And we will probably see a few examples in my refactors later on, where I actually did notice after I added this into the code that, hey, I actually used the incorrect names for my classes. And that's kind of why I think this is a good idea. And then I've added, yeah, let's just go through the boilerplate. I added a few new components to my main file, which is just going to be, this is my entry point into my CSS. And then we added a bunch of new variables that I kind of just add as I go along. Set some basic font families and stuff of this nature on the body so that we have some default. I mean, we're not going for a UX prize in this series, but something that looks a little bit better than sans serif. Although sans serif is nice as well. And then we have a few new images, all that good stuff. But let's have a look at our package.json and see here that I've actually added a few things. So because we now have images, we need to support a way of adding these images in, like these little flags and the icons and all that good stuff. So what I did here is basically that I moved my dist, my tasks from my dist, like just instead of running them in sequence in the dist task, I just move them down to this pre-dist script. And pre is just a way for you to say that, all right, before this command runs, do this. So dist, pre-dist, Hopefully that makes sense. So now we're going to run the clean task, which is going to clean our resource folder or the public folder in our outputted jar, or but basically in our jar file. And we're also going to copy our images. And basically all that's going to do is that it's going to copy everything from our client images to the public directory and create an image directory in the jar files assets, or the resource folder. Hopefully that makes sense to you, because that basically means that when we then compile the jar, we will have these images served up from that static folder, or from that static assets folder. I needed to, and in order to support that in my dev server, I simply added another route /images, and then basically I just pointed that to my client directory and the image directory within that client. So if we have a look at the output here, we'll see here that in my client directory, I have all these different images for the flags, and well, these SVGs that I've shamelessly borrowed from the main project. Anywho, let's have a look here. We did a few small things. You can see here that these brackets are there, and this is because I added in that lint rule so that I actually had to structure out the actual component. And that is actually a pretty, like, as you can see here, I simply removed default exports, and now it's just exports. Just these sorts of things that's happened pretty much everywhere. And because, hey, well, like, just adding a tslint disable to this file because this is not compliant with the linting rules. And I've already pretty much, well, I add some basic styles here just so that the max width on the body is there, so I don't have like the screen go all, you know, if I do this thing here and we can decrease the size here, you can see that it kind of cuts off there because I don't want it to expand forever. It has to have some type of breakpoint where, you know, the content body doesn't expand anymore. And then we can see here that I have my header section. So basically you can see these, this is pretty much all we've added, 3 components: header, project bar, and translation bar. So in the header, this is the entire thing. Like the header is just this section up here, this little section there. And all it has is this one single element right now, which is just going to state that, hey, you're logged in as some type of user. So it's a fairly small and simple component with some associated styling. The way that I usually do this is, as you can see here, that I have a components directory and I create my components. And unless a component is multi-use, which is this label button, we will look at that in just a moment, I try to keep things in the same directory. So this translation bar is the one that has the most components, but we'll walk through all of those. But I like the way that to think about it is to kind of group it as a module, because if you can create this module project structure, that is by far the most extensible way, and it's not standard practice, but I can tell you that there's quite a lot of people that swear by this approach, and I am one of those people. Let's have a look at, well, let's not look at our label button just yet, because that is a little bit of a special case. Let's have a look at the project bar here. So the project bar is, well, basically this. All it is this little section here with the search field and the flags and the name. As you can see here, project name, our languages component, and a search field. Go into languages, this is all it is. Right now, doesn't have to be fancier than that. We might in the future, depending on how far we want to push this, it might be that our application is just going to support these 2 languages, or we might make a configuration file or something like that, so that when we set up a new project, we can simply add new flags in or things of this nature. We'll see where we end up. And then our search field, super trivial right now because, hey, we're just kind of setting things up. Our project bar, some basic styles, and as you can see here, I follow the BEM style of writing CSS. And then we have our translation bar, which is this final section down here. And if we have a look at the translation bar, all that is, well, it's basically this little list with a tag filtering box and an add keys box, which is basically just containers for these 2 sections here. So this thing here and this thing here. So if we have a look at the simpler one, add keys, which is this thing here, I can actually see, well, you can see here that all it is this little, well, the span with the keys and the number of keys, and then we have this thing called badge button. And I can now actually see, I'll need to fix this. I'll rename this because it shouldn't say label button, it should say badge button. But anywho, we'll fix that later. And apart from that, we have this little tag filtering box. Now this is a special one. This is probably where a bit of the heavier lifting is being done. So basically, in order for us to support this thing here, where you click here and you see this little tooltip here and you can select and all of this stuff, this is pretty much the code in order to make that happen. So as you can see here, we have this little interface. Well, I always have an interface for them because, hey, we're using TypeScript, and then you should always have an interface for your state and your properties if you actually care about that stuff. Use the type system. Types are awesome. And then we have this little state here for selecting a tag or showing the drop down, and then we have bound these little functions here. The reason why we want to do that is because if we don't and we pass them in as input parameters to another React element, this keyword loses its context, and you basically are left like well, in essence, it's not going to be able to identify methods such as, say, set state. And you can get around this by putting things inside of a closure or like a lambda function, but I prefer this approach. It's just a personal preference. And here are our helpers so that we can reset the selected tag, and we can show the dropdown, we can hide the dropdown, and then we can select a tag. And then basically we add this badge button, which is this generic reusable component, which is going to take in an on-click handler, an ID, and a variant. And as you can see here, we have two things that's going to happen when we select a tag whenever we render. So either we're going to set the variant to active, or it's just going to be undefined. We'll touch on that in just a moment as well, as to why that is. And then we have a conditional here where we may render this button element, which is going to be the icon for showing this little X here, this close button there. And that's just going to be there if there is a selected tag. And then finally we have if the dropdown should show or not. Now if we have a look at the dropdown, we can see here that it's this fairly simple component where basically it's just going to it's basically just going to show this thing here, right? It's going to show us this little tooltip. But in order for us to be able to know when we should remove it or when it shouldn't be shown anymore, we kind of have to add a click listener. So when I actually click this button, what's going to happen is that this component is going to mount. And when this component mounts, we're going to add an event listener for the click event to our document with the onClose function. In other words, when the component has started, we pass in the onClose function, which was the thing you saw earlier, where basically when we click, we're going to set that show dropdown to false. And that's going to trigger whenever we click somewhere on the page. And then this event is going to fire, and we're going to remove that event listener again, because we don't want to add it in and then not remove it. So we do a little bit of cleanup as well, and that's why it's being toggled on and off. Now this component is going to have dynamic values later on, but for now we just hard code these values until we can actually get some data. And then when the onSelect function is being called, we are simply going to grab the props onTagSelect that has been passed in. And all that's going to happen there is that we are going to pass in the event, the click event, and we're going to get the text content of the target of that event. And the target is going to be the list item element, like the element itself. And the text content is, hey, these things here. Cool, let's just scroll through. Like, there's quite a bit of CSS here as well. We don't have to go through this because then we're going to be here all day and we don't have time for all of that good stuff. Anywho, let's look at the thing that probably is most like the few final things that I wanted to touch on. Like, you saw this tag name here. It's not a super interesting component. I see here that I have a little bit of a lint problem there. And I can also see that I need to do this here because, hey, my linter is warning me. That's what's so nice about having a linter. It knows things better than you do. Anywho, this is just a tag name, as you saw, basically this thing here. Should it be shown or should it not be shown? And all I want to do here is that if there is a tag, we should just return an empty span. And if there is if there is a tag, we simply show a span with the proper styling to keep things nice and clean. And finally, let's have a look at the label button. So the label button is a reusable component, and one of the classic things that happens when you have a button is that it's hard to make a generic button. It's very hard. And the way that for me personally, the way that it works best is to use the variant approach to this. And basically what a variant is simply that you have a standard button of some sort, which is going to be, well, we're going to call this a badge button. And a badge button, I mean, these two things here, they are the exact same component. It's just that I have a variant state for it there, which I need to be able to express. So instead of duplicating this component completely, all I do is that I pass in a variant. I don't allow my consumer of my button to do whatever they want, because I don't want some other developer to completely, well, because the dangerous part is if you allow people to do too much and to configure absolutely everything, it becomes a lot of hassle, and the component usually grows in complexity. So what I prefer to do is to just give them a variant, because all I really want is to change the color to, say, orange, or things of this nature. You really don't want to remake the entire button, you just want to change some aspect of it. And this is where the variant comes in. So I have a variant for the active state. And basically what's going to happen is that you may or may not pass in a variant, and then of course I spread out all the other properties to the button elements, because we're really only we're really only making a button here. And then the variant is going to be checked, and if there is no variant, we're simply going to return the standard button, which is going to be the blue color. And if it's not, or rather if there is actually a variant passed in, I'm just going to type check it and see which one it is. And then I have some basic styles here that represent the different types, or the different variants of my button. And that's about it. That way, I mean, if we need to add more types, or maybe one badge button needs to be red, or have a different font, or some other small variation, I can support pretty much any variation I want without breaking the quote-unquote simple interface of the button itself. So this way I've found it to be a very scalable way to keep down the complexity of components that usually differ a little bit here and there, and you don't have to rewrite the whole component. Anywho, that is pretty much it. So yeah, let's have a look here. That's us pretty much done with this task. I'll do a little bit of a refactor on the names there, but I feel that we're pretty much done now and can start looking at creating a translation row, which is going to be this section here. So let's look at that in the next video.